Egypt. Long ago, the land of Egypt was under the ocean. Then, for a time, it was a tropical forest. But with the gradual desiccation of Africa, this changed to savanna, and then to prairie, and finally to a desert. During this long process, the people living there naturally moved closer to the Nile River, until they were congregated within a few miles of its banks, or within its delta, which had spread out before entering the Mediterranean Sea. In contrast to the surrounding desert, this land was quite fertile, supplying them with wild barley, fish, ducks, geese, turtles, crocodiles, hippopotami, and other game animals and plant food. Their first homes followed the traditional pattern as oval huts made from mud. During the 6th millennium BC, they learned how to domesticate wheat, barley, sheep, goats, and cattle. Flax was grown, spun into thread, and woven into linen for clothing. Genetically, the ancient Egyptians were a mixture of African, Asian, and Mediterranean peoples. The Egyptian language is of Semitic origin. Houses eventually became rectangular with better-shaped mud bricks. Donkeys were used, and pigs were kept on the delta. Egyptians are credited with breeding hornless cattle, the greyhound, and were the first to domesticate cats. Boats were used for trading, which enabled them to secure copper and other metals. Their use of flint for blades became very refined. Tools began to include harpoons, hoes, spindles, looms, drills for hollowing out stone bases. They were religious and supplied food and other items to their dead in their graves. Many ideas have been communicated to them through trade routes from Mesopotamia. Evidence definitely indicates that Sumerian seals were adopted by Egyptians. Egyptian art shows a quick development of monumental architecture using bricks in recessed walls of decorative paneling using Sumerian artistic motifs. Displaying a hero between two beasts, fabulous animals with intertwined necks, and Mesopotamian boats. Perhaps the most important idea the Egyptians adopted from the Sumerians was writing. Egyptian hieroglyphics, while a different language, are based on the same principles as Sumerian pictographs, ideograms, and phonograms, both using the rebus principle, depicting a syllable to convey additional meaning. As boats traveled up and down the Nile and populations producing abundant food with irrigation systems increased, the inevitable social complexities developed. In Egypt, this was divided into two states, the lower delta in the north, heralded by a red crown, and Upper Egypt in the south, symbolized by a lily plant and a white crown. The traditional dynasties, designated by the Egyptian historian Manetho about 300 BC, began about 3100 BC, with the first king Manetho called Menes, who apparently conquered the south and united Egypt in the central capital of Saqqara, later named Memphis. Archaeologists have identified Menes with Narmer, who is depicted on a pallet triumphing over smaller, cowering figures. Narmer holds up a mace and wears the white southern crown. The god Horus is prominently displayed as a falcon above even Narmer. Menes, who was from Abydos, established Saqqara in a central location by building a large dam above the site. He also attacked the Nubians in the south and conducted military operations in the east. Diodorus Siculus wrote that Menes taught the people to worship the gods and offer sacrifices, and supplied them with such luxuries as tables, couches, and costly bedding. Menes was succeeded by Aha, who also fought the Nubians, and the third king, Jer, who may have ventured as far to the east as Sinai, and to the second cataract in the south. The fifth and last king of the first dynasty, Din, was also active militarily while he regulated the administration of Egypt. He was the first to wear the double crown, symbolizing the union of north and south. Conflicts were apparently solved by the first king of the second dynasty, whose name Hetepsekemui means the two powers are at peace. This dynasty began about 2890 BC. The fourth king, Peribsen, identified himself with the god Set instead of Horus. In the past, Horus had been associated with the delta, while the Set cult had been near Nakada of Upper Egypt. Peribsen seems to have introduced the Set cult into the northeastern delta, and his seals label an animal resembling Set Ash, which is the Libyan name for that deity. The enmity between the rival deities Horus and Set seems to reflect a religious war, for the next king was the warrior Kasekim, who was loyal to Horus. His stela gives the number of slain Libyans in his conquest of the north as 47,209. After this war, he may have changed his name to, or was succeeded by, Kasekemui, Debit Hot Pimef, which means the two powers are arisen, the two lords are at peace in him. Meanwhile, the Egyptians invented paper from papyrus and were advancing in astronomy, geometry, accounting, surgery, and architecture. During the first dynasty, a king had the floor of his burial pit lined with slabs of cut granite. A king of the second dynasty had a complete chamber of his brick tomb constructed from carefully fitted limestone, and according to royal records, a temple was built in stone. The mortuary architecture of Egypt was about to astound the world. Old Kingdom. In the 27th century BC, the most prominent king of the third dynasty was Djoser, who for his tomb ordered the first pyramid built of stone. The architectural genius behind this development was Imhotep, who was renowned for his knowledge of healing and had counseled Djoser when the land was suffering from a 7-year famine. They used local limestone and seemed to be building a large structure with stepped-back recesses when they changed their minds and continued the stepped recesses all the way to the top. Unlike the later massive blocks, the limestone was cut into smaller brick-sized pieces. Djoser's successor, Sekhemket, also started on a pyramid, but it was of lesser quality and was not completed. The last king of the third dynasty, Huni, also attempted a pyramid and failed. However, the Great Pyramids of the fourth dynasty indicate that these kings had gained an unprecedented power and authority over the people who apparently worshipped the king as a god. Yet they demonstrate not only great loyalty to their king, but also the advancing skill of their architects, engineers, artisans, and builders. About 2613 BC, the new king Snefru inaugurated the fourth dynasty and oversaw the building of 2 large pyramids, safely constructed with lower angles of incline. Inscriptions claim that he brought back 7,000 captives and 200,000 cattle from Libya, copper from the Sinai, where he defeated the native tribes, and 40 vessels of cedar wood from Byblos in Lebanon. Relying on relatives and devoted officials who worked in his palace, Snefru's administration was highly centralized. His successor, Khufu, was less liked but autocratically commanded obedience by promising fine tombs for a royal family and high officials in a cemetery next to his pyramid at Giza. His administration built the largest pyramid with 2,300,000 blocks averaging 2.5 tons each. At 480 feet, it is not the highest building ever, but it is the most massive structure ever built. Herodotus, the Greek historian from the 5th century BC, calculated that it must have taken 100,000 workers, and he castigated these kings as cruel tyrants. Archaeologists have argued that not that many men could have worked effectively at the same time, and that at certain times of the year agricultural workers would have been otherwise unemployed. Nevertheless, the crowded mud brick and thatched barracks of the workers, compared to the large and commodious houses of the rich, indicate the economic and social injustice of the time. Khufu was followed by the 9-year rule of Rejedef, who may have been a usurper. Then Khafre built another pyramid almost as large and had the famous Sphinx carved out of the rock. It is not surprising that both Khufu and Khafre were remembered in tradition as having been hard and difficult. Menkore, who succeeded Khafre, is credited by Herodotus with liberating the people from the excessive labor of the Great Pyramid builders. He opened the temples, returned to sacrifices, and was so conscientious in administering justice that he gave someone who complained to have been wronged by the king whatever he claimed as recompense. However, he was heartbroken at the death of his only daughter, with whom he may have been in love, and he lavished attention on her mausoleum. His own pyramid was not nearly as large as those of his predecessors and was left unfinished at his death. Deeply religious, Menkaure was disturbed by a prophecy that he should end his life because his 5-year term was expired. Pleading that he should be allowed to live longer because he had treated the people better, the priests answered that he had gone against what was supposed to be a 150-year period in which Egypt was to be punished by her kings. Menkaure tried to go on, but was only able to extend his term to 12 years. A beautiful slate statue of him standing next to his equally tall queen, who has her arm around him, shows the respect he had for his wife. After Menkaure, the 4th dynasty began to disintegrate. Shepsekaf hastily finished and furnished Menkaure's pyramid, but only had a rectangular sarcophagus built for himself at Saqqara. The bridge to the new dynasty seems to have been Queen Kentkaues, whose title means either King and Mother of Upper and Lower Egypt, or Mother of the 2 kings of Upper and Lower Egypt. She was the wife of the first king of the 5th dynasty, Userkaf, who adopted the title Son of Re and supported the sun god cult of Heliopolis. Userkaf's mother was the daughter of Rejedef, and a prophecy had said that Rejedef's son would become high priest of the sun god Re at On, Heliopolis. Userkaf and his 2 sons by Kentkaues all called themselves Sons of Re, and did make the Re cult dominant in Egypt, building outdoor sun temples with a large obelisk for the worship of Re. Their pyramids were of moderate size and fine artistry. Inscriptions on the funerary monuments of 5th and 6th dynasty kings indicate that they still were engaging in expeditions for natural resources to Libya, Syria, Sinai, Nubia, and to Punt, which may have been in Somalia. The said festival was celebrated to renew the king's reign after a number of years, usually 30, in order to get around the old tradition that the king must die so as not to be weakened by old age. Provincial administrators were gaining power and more independence, as the king and his family found theirs decreasing. Papyri from this king and his family found papyri from this period revealed detailed administrative records of the temples. The earliest pyramid texts were inscribed in the pyramid of Unas, the last king of the 5th dynasty. They begin with the heavenly goddess Nut reciting words of comfort to the king, such as, "I enfold your beauty within this soul of mine for all life, permanence, dominion, and health for the king. May he live forever." Prayers and magical incantations identify the king with Osiris and assure him that he will be well provided with food and everything he needs for his journey to heaven. Osiris is helped up the ladder to heaven by his son Horus and the sun god Re to awake in the eternal life of spirit. Decentralization continued during the 6th dynasty, which began about 2345 BC with the reign of Teti, whose viziers, prime ministers, Kagemni and Mereruka, seem to have gained unprecedented power judging by their elaborate tombs. Inscribed in a tomb at Abydos is an autobiographical account of Uni, who rose from humble birth to be a minor official under Teti, and then a friend of Pepi I, who appointed him judge over cases involving conspiracy in the royal harem. Next, Uni was put in command of an army of many tens of thousands, drawn from all over Egypt and Nubia to oversee towns and villages and foreign lands and prevent quarreling and stealing. Uni boasts of returning in peace after raiding the land of the sand dwellers. 5 times Uni was sent off for this task. Then he went to the nose of the gazelle, possibly Mount Carmel, and killed the insurrectionists there. Although Pepi I may have reigned for 50 years, Uni then claims that he became governor of Upper Egypt in the succeeding reign of Merenre, overseeing the building of 5 navigable channels in the First Cataract to facilitate trade with Nubia and get granite for the royal pyramid. In his first year, Merenre even went to the First Cataract himself to meet with the Nubian chieftains of the Medjay, Urtjay, and Wawat. Merenre was succeeded by Pepi II when he was only a boy, and he ruled Egypt for more than 90 years. Obviously, the tradition of killing aged kings had been overcome. Pepi II's pyramid was about 100 feet high and similar to the 4 previous ones, but his long reign was followed by several short reigns, with perhaps a woman being the last monarch of the 6th dynasty. Royal power waned as the provincial authorities became stronger. The Osiris religion seemed to be replacing the state religion of Re. The 7th through the 10th dynasties are called the First Intermediate Period. So chaotic was this time that Manetho's excerptor Julius Africanus relates there were 70 kings in 70 days in the 7th dynasty, and 65 kings in the rest of this period, which actually lasted only about a century. Although the kings of the 7th and 8th dynasties continued to claim that they were ruling over all of Egypt, in fact, their sway was probably feeble beyond their capital at Memphis. For a while, a family in Coptos of Upper Egypt claimed the throne. Civil strife is indicated by funerary boats that were depicted with large oxhide shields over their cabin roofs. A ruler in Asyut had 2 companies of model warriors put in his grave. The prophet Nefer-Rohu described this civil war in a prophecy of how Amenemhet I, founder of the 12th dynasty in the Middle Kingdom, will unify Egypt once again. This literary piece is set back in the court of Snefru of the 4th dynasty, who willingly listens to the prophecy of Nefer-Rohu, which describes how Egypt will suffer before Amenemhet I. The Asiatics will move in with strong arms, disturb the harvest, and take away cattle at plowing. The land completely perishes. Not even so much dirt as found under a black fingernail will survive. The sun will be covered and not shine. The rivers run dry, and winds will oppose each other. A foreign bird will be born in the northern marshes, and people will let it approach because of their need. Fish ponds will be damaged, and the land will be prostrate because of that. The Asiatic enemies who arose in the east have come down into Egypt. No protector will listen, while the wild beasts drink at the rivers of Egypt. The land is in disorder and upside down. Men will take up the weapons of war in confusion. Nefer-Rohu prophesies the making of arrows of metal, which began in the 11th dynasty. People will beg for the bread of blood and will laugh sick laughter. Death will become so common that people no longer weep nor fast in mourning. People turn their backs while one man kills another. Sons and brothers are enemies, and a man kills his own father. Everyone is saying, "Love me," but everything good has disappeared. People's property is taken from them and given to outsiders. Citizens are treated as hateful in order to silence people. If someone answers a statement, an arm goes out with a stick, and men say, "Kill him." As the land becomes poorer, its administrators increase, and taxes are heavy. Re rarely shines on people. Situations are reversed. The weak now have arms. Men salute the one who before saluted. The undermost are now on top. People live in the city of the dead. The poor man is wealthy. Paupers eat the sacred bread. The Heliopolitan Nome, birthplace of all the gods, will no longer exist. Then a king from the south will come, Ameni, the triumphant, who will wear the white and red crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. The evil and rebellious will subdue their speech out of fear of him. The Asiatics will fall to his sword, the Libyans to his flame. The Asiatics will no longer be allowed to come into Egypt. Justice will come as wrongdoing is cast out. Amidst this chaos, a powerful family arose in the Fayum at Heracleopolis to rule the central portion of Egypt as the 9th and 10th dynasties for about a century, which stimulated classical Egyptian literature. Manetho mentions only the first king, Akhthos, whom he described as behaving more cruelly than his predecessors and doing evil to the Egyptian people until he went mad and was killed by a crocodile. King Neferkari had to capitulate after a battle with the Thebans, and the 9th dynasty came to an end shortly after the Theban revolution of 2133 BC, which established their independence under Mentuhotep I, founder of the 11th dynasty. Meanwhile, the second king of the 10th dynasty, Wakare Akhthos III, managed to coexist with the Asiatics on the eastern delta. Since Thebes was advancing in the south with his ally Asyut, he attacked them at This, capturing them like a cloudburst. But he regretted allowing his troops to plunder the sacred tombs. Later, the Theban king Inyotep II came back and drove the Heracleopolitans out of the Thinite nome. After this, peace lasted for several decades as Wakare reigned nearly half a century. In his instructions for his son, Merikare, the king warned him that a quarrelsome man causes unrest and factions among the young and suggests that he be suppressed as an enemy. A good disposition is a blessing. He recommends his son be a craftsman of speech, for the tongue is more powerful than fighting, suggesting he read and copy knowledge. Do not be evil. Being kind is good. Work for the future. He should reward his counselors, for the wealthy are not partial, while the poor are easily bribed. If he speaks the truth in his house and is upright, those outside will be inspired by fear. Do right. Calm the sad. Oppress no widow. Do not take away the possessions of someone's father. Be careful not to punish wrongly, and do not punish by death but with beatings and imprisonment. Do not kill one whom he knew well in school, for the soul may come back to haunt him. He warned his son Merikare that his actions will be judged after death. Life is short compared to eternity. Those who reach the next existence without wrongdoing will be like a god. Raise the young troops well and reward them based on their merits, not on their birth. He suggested the prince be lenient and stand well with the southern land. Accept whatever grain they can give. The king claims he has pacified the delta so that their tribute of products is assured. He explained that it was the civil war that allowed the Asiatics to come into Egypt. He lamented the hacking up of graves, for after he learned of it, he felt its recompense. More acceptable is the virtue of a just heart than the ox of the wicked. Thus he admonished him to give his love to the whole world and have the remembrance of good character. From this time of suffering, some wisdom was emerging, which shall be examined further below. The uneasy truce between Heracleopolis and Thebes may have prevented cooperation on irrigation, because this time is known for its shortages and famines. With the death of King Merikare about 2040 BC, the Theban king Mentuhotep II invaded successfully and was credited as being the second unifier of the North and South in Egyptian history and the inaugurator of the Middle Kingdom. Mentuhotep II undertook extensive building of mortuary temples in Upper Egypt and sent off expeditions to Nubia, Libya, Syria, and Sinai for materials and men. He boasts of dominating the 9 peoples of the bow, Egypt's traditional enemies, by clubbing the eastern lands, striking down the hill countries, trampling the deserts, enslaving the Nubians, Medjay and Wawat, the Libyans, etc. Mentuhotep II is depicted striking down an aristocratic Egyptian along with a Nubian, an Asiatic, and a Libyan who represent the foreign auxiliaries of the Heracleopolitan armies. In establishing order throughout Egypt, the process of re-centralization had begun, and Thebans now dominated the administration. Succeeding his father in 2009 BC, Mentuhotep III organized an expedition of 3,000 men to travel east from Coptos to re-establish trade with Punt, Somalia, via the Red Sea. After 12 years, he was succeeded by the brief reign of Mentuhotep IV. His vizier led another expedition of some 10,000 men to the Red Sea and miraculously found the stone for the sarcophagus where a gazelle had dropped her young. 8 days later, a rainstorm revealed an excellent well. This vizier, who claims to have been overseeing everything in the land, established himself as the next king, Amenemhet I, founder of the 12th dynasty. The establishment of Amenemhet I was justified as fulfilling the prophecy of a king arising in the south who would end the chaos of the great new era. As his name indicates, he promoted the worship of the god Amen, which means hidden. This invisible god eventually attained widespread dominion in Egypt, and his probably the origin of the word still used for ending prayers. Amenemhet moved the capital closer to the north, near Memphis, where he and his successor, Sesostris I, built their pyramids. The chiefs of the local nomes were restored to their powers and privileges, their districts being clearly defined along with their share of Nile water. Nomes were required to provide militia and workers when needed. One such military adventure was to reestablish control of the Upper Nile and Lower Nubia. Asiatic nomads were also driven out of the eastern delta, and fortified posts were built to keep them out. After ruling 20 years, about 1972 BC, Amenemhet I made his son Sesostris co-regent, and for 10 years they ruled together, a policy making a stable succession much more likely. They pushed back the northern border to the Second Cataract and built a fort there. Sesostris also fought the Libyans. While this son was in Libya, Amenemhet was probably assassinated at night by conspiring eunuchs. A mysterious document claiming to be his instructions to his son after he died describes the attack. He warns his son to be on his guard against subordinates. Trust neither brother nor friend. He gave to the poor and nourished the orphan, but one who ate his food disdained him. A conspiracy in the palace attacked him while he was in bed, and alone he could not fight them off. He wonders if they had not heard that he was already resigning power to his son Sesostris. He then recounts his reign and how he fought to extend the borders, supplied everyone with food and drink, overcame Nubians and Bedouins, and adorned a house with precious metals. Sesostris I wasted no time in returning to strengthen his rule, and he extended his territory even farther south in Nubia, where gold was being mined for Egypt. Sesostris continued to mine and build, including towering granite obelisks at the Re Atum temple at Heliopolis during his said festival. At Karnak, the god Amun-Re was honored with large structures. Sesostris himself was regarded as a god, and once again the power of the kings increased. He ruled for 35 years after his father's death and brought in his own son Amenemhet II as co-regent for his last 2 years. Amenemhet II and Sesostris II increased Egyptian prosperity by reclaiming land for agriculture in the Fayum Depression with surplus Nile water. More Asiatics immigrated into Egypt to work as servants, and trade was established as far away as Crete and Babylon. About 1878 BC, Sesostris III became king and somehow managed to centralize power administered over the regions of Lower, Middle, and Upper Egypt by 3 officers who were under the vizier, just like the departments of justice, agriculture, labor, and the treasury. The decreased power of the nobles allowed a larger middle class of craftsmen, traders, and farmers to develop. Concerned about the Nubians, he had a channel excavated through the First Cataract to sail his warships through to attack the wretched Kush. 8 years later, he returned to devastate the Untiu of Nubia by wiping out their settlements, carrying off the women, fouling the wells, and burning the grain fields. A chain of 8 brick forts were built, and the entrance of Nehesiu, Negroes, was limited to trading and official business. During this 45-year reign, Amenemhet III continued to develop the irrigation systems of the Lake Moeris at Fayum, and the mining, which sometimes required smiting the Bedouins of the Sinai and southern Palestine. This long period of prosperity attracted more immigrants. Amenemhet IV ruled only 9 years and was followed by his sister Sebeknefru, whose reign was less than 4 years. Like the woman who had ruled before her, she was the last of a dynasty. The demise of the Middle Kingdom was about 1786 BC, followed by a series of kings who reigned for less than 3 years each, while most of the power was in the hands of the vizier. The decline of the Middle Kingdom was foreshadowed in the execration texts. These were magical spells inscribed on pottery that was then smashed, expressing curses on all enemies, real and potential. These included foreign rulers of Jerusalem and Byblos, as well as other Asiatics, members of Egyptian royal families, and anyone who might rebel or fight or talk of rebelling or fighting. While strong viziers like Anku ruled during the series of short reigns of the 13th dynasty, the bureaucracy that had replaced local rule seemed to disintegrate. In the western delta, a new line of petty rulers sprung up in Khoi, identified as the 14th dynasty by Manetho. Increasing numbers of Asiatics were hired as servants. Egyptian literature. From the first capital at Memphis, which united Upper and Lower Egypt, and was called the balance in which the two lands were weighed, comes a brief creation myth, which is probably from the early part of the Old Kingdom. The greatest god at this time was called Ptah, who brought into being the creator god of the totality, Atum, and transmitted divinity to their souls, Ka, through the heart by Horus, and through speech by Thoth. Thus, God is in every person, God and animal, that lives and controls itself by thinking and commanding whatever one wishes. Atum came into being by the semen and fingers of Ptah. The sun and life-giving moisture came from the pronouncements of his mouth. The sense of sight, hearing, and smelling report to the heart, which completes thoughts and enables the tongue to announce what the heart thinks. The Ka spirits were made, and everything was provided for by speech. Life was given to those who have peace, and death to those with sin. All actions of the body and crafts were made by what the heart thought and the tongue commanded. After Ptah brought all the gods into being and every good thing in the divine order, including cities and shrines, he was satisfied. So all the gods and their souls gathered themselves to him and were content with the Lord of the two lands. The oldest known wisdom literature is a collection of advice attributed to the vizier Ptah-hotep, who served King Isi of the 5th dynasty in the 25th century BC. He begins by saying to his son that in this instructing of the ignorant about wisdom and good speech, it will be advantageous for him to listen and disadvantageous to neglect these teachings. Yet he should not let his heart be puffed up by knowledge or be overly confident. Listen to the ignorant as well as the wise, because there is no limit to how much skill may be attained. Good speech is often hidden and may be found among women working in the mills. As a leader in commanding, he should seek out what is beneficial and avoid wrongdoing. For justice is what is great and enduring. Justice is eternally the same and punishes those who pass beyond its laws. Fraud may gain riches, but the strength of justice lasts and may be considered the inheritance of his father. He advises respect for one greater and acceptance of whatever he may give. Even to stare rudely can be an offense against the soul or the Ka. Look down and only laugh when he laughs. In this authoritarian society, meekness toward the powerful is recommended. If trusted to carry an errand, be reliable and don't be forgetful. Grasp the truth, but don't exceed it. If you knew someone before he became powerful, don't be puffed up, but respect him for what he is now. If your son listens and acts well, seek him out for useful actions. But if he goes astray and transgresses, cast him off as no son at all. When listening to petitions, hear them out, even though it might not be granted, for a good hearing soothes the heart. If one wants to develop a friendship in a home, beware of approaching the women, for you may be made a fool and attain death through knowing her. Do not be covetous or greedy when things are being divided, or else a calm man becomes contentious. As for a wife, he recommends filling her belly, clothing her back, and prescribes ointment for her body to make her heart glad. In this male-dominated society, he considers her a profitable field for her lord, and warns against contending with her at law or letting her gain control. Ptah-hotep suggests satisfying your clients with your wealth, for in time of trouble you do not turn to a stranger, indicating perhaps that payoffs were common. If you are a counselor to the Lord, look to the good, or be silent. If you speak, know how to explain the difficulties. Bow to your superior, for opposition will be painful. Test friends with conversation. But even if he does something you don't like, Remember, he is still a friend, and don't trample on him. If you hear this, it will be well, for hearing is a great advantage of the heart, which is life, property, and health. The properly instructed will stand well with officials, and speech will be guided by what has been said. Obedience is obviously strongly valued, and the obedient son is considered a follower of Horus. Ptah-hotep hopes that his son will also find the king satisfied as he has, and will live as long as he, which he claims is 110 years. One story from the Middle Kingdom tells how the gods almost destroyed humanity because they had been plotting against the self-created Re. Re called his own eye and his followers to assemble without humans seeing. The god said he should send his eye to smite them, and the goddess Hathor went and slew people in the desert. Then Re sent for red ochre and barley to make beer as red as human blood. On the day the goddess was to slay humanity on their southern travels, Re declared the beer good and sent it to flood the fields. The goddess came and drank the beer, which pleased her heart, and drunk she could not perceive humanity. Finally, the god Re welcomed the goddess in peace. Another story of possible destruction is a dialogue between a man considering suicide and his soul, who seems to be urging him on. However, the soul will not stay with him if he kills himself. The man wants to go be judged by Thoth and Re, but wants his soul to make it pleasant for him. The soul replies that he is too attached to good things like one who possesses treasures. The man says that he cannot go away if his soul remains on the earth. If his soul will listen to him and agree, it will be happy in the West, death, like the soul of one buried in a pyramid. He requests his soul to take care of him in death like a mourning heir would. The soul replies that after burial, the man will not go forth into the sun anymore. The soul advises him to forget his cares and enjoy life. Telling a tale of a humble family eaten by crocodiles, the tragedy of the children not getting a chance to live is apparent. Breaking into poetry, the man laments how his name is abhorred, asking who can he speak to when evil abounds everywhere, admitting that death appears before him now as a blessing, like becoming healthy after illness, or going to a world of real justice and knowledge. Finally, the soul suggests that his comrade cast aside sorrow, for if he will reject death, his soul will abide with him. When death comes and his body is united with the earth, the soul will be free after that rest. The soul concludes, "Let us live together." The most popular literary piece of the Middle Kingdom was probably the story of Sinuhe, which tells how a henchman of King Amenemhet I fled after his assassination, crossed the Nile in a barge, and made it to Suez before falling down in thirst. He was rescued by a sheik and went to Byblos and Kedemi, where he was taken in by a Palestinian prince. In discussing Egypt, he assures the prince that the new king will do well, for he had already subdued the foreign lands while his father was in the palace. Sinuhe married the prince's eldest daughter and was given the best land with figs, vines, honey, oil, barley, wheat, and cattle. He lived there many years as a military captain and tribal ruler, his children also becoming tribal chiefs. When someone came to challenge him, perhaps resenting that he was a foreigner, Sinuhe slew him in combat and plundered his goods. Still loyal and thankful to his divine king, he prays to him that he might return to Egypt. King Sesostris heard of his plea and sent Sinuhe a royal decree authorizing his return so that he could be buried honorably in the land of his birth. Sinuhe sends a reply full of praise, asking to come back and explaining that he had not planned his earlier flight. The king sent a ship to bring Sinuhe back, and ushered into the royal presence, he lay on his belly before the majesty. The queen did not believe that it was Sinuhe, but the king recognized him, appointed him chamberlain, and provided him with luxuries and the highest honor for an Egyptian, an excellent tomb. This story, filled with elegant metaphors, affirmed Egyptian values and patriotism. A similar story of a shipwrecked sailor was also written during the Middle Kingdom. Having set out for the mines of the sovereign, a large ship carrying 120 sailors is destroyed in a storm. and he is cast alone on an island where he finds figs, vines, leeks, fruit, cucumbers, fish, and fowl. Using 2 sticks for a fire drill, he kindles a fire to sacrifice to the gods, when he sees a huge serpent, 15 meters long, overlaid with gold, and having eyebrows of lapis lazuli, who asked him why he is there. The sailor explains about the ship going to the mines that perished, and the serpent offers him every good thing there on the island until a ship comes to take him back to the royal residence. In gratitude, the sailor offers the serpent precious perfumes. But the latter laughs because, as Prince of Punt, he has myrrh and hikinu in abundance. When the ship comes, the serpent gives him numerous treasures that the Egyptians imported from the incense-producing countries. The sailor takes these back to his sovereign, who thanks him and appoints him a henchman. This story expresses the adventures and rewards of foreign trade. Another Middle Kingdom story indicates how difficult it could be for a poor person to obtain justice. A peasant packed his asses with food and goods for trade, and leaving his wife went south to Heracleopolis. A man named Dehutinect, who worked for one of the vassals of the high steward Pensi, saw the asses and plotted how he could get them. After petitioning Dehutinect for 10 days futilely, the peasant went to Heracleopolis to petition the high steward Renzi, who made an accusation against Dehutinect before his magistrates. But they assumed the peasant had left his master and decided that he should only replace the salts. So the peasant went to Renzi and pleaded for justice. And the steward went to King Nibkore, telling him that an eloquent peasant had been robbed by his subject. The king ordered food to be given to the peasant and his family secretly, because he wanted to hear the peasant's speeches. The peasant petitioned the steward again, accusing the magistrates and him of wrongdoing when they should right wrongs. In condemning their negligence, the peasant waxed rhetorical and came back a 3rd time to complain some more, and then a 4th time and a 5th. On the 6th time he said, "The arbitrator is a spoiler, the peacemaker is a maker of sorrow." The peasant petitioned and spoke a 7th, 8th, and 9th time, declaring as he left that he intended to petition Anubis next in the world of the dead. Then the steward had him recalled and had all his previous speeches read aloud to the king, who was pleased more than by anything else in the entire country. The king told the peasant he could make his own judgment, and from the concluding fragments it appears he was given the possessions of Dehutinect. The story of the magicians was probably written during the Hyksos period, but it was set back in the old kingdom of the pyramid builders Khufu and Khafre. Khufu wants to know about the magicians. Prince Khafre's tale is about the wife of Uba-Oner, who took her pleasure with one of the king's pages in her garden. So Uba-Oner made a crocodile of wax 7 fingers long, which in the bath of the page became a great crocodile 7 cubits long and seized the page. Later, Uba-Oner presented the crocodile to the king, and it became wax again. The king, in the story, told the crocodile to take his prey and ordered the wife burned and thrown in the river. Prince Balfrey's tale is about Khufu's father Snefru, who ordered 20 virgins with beautiful limbs, breasts, and hair to be dressed in net and row a boat on the lake where he could watch. When one of them lost the pendant in the water, she stopped singing, followed by the others. The king ordered his chief scribe, Zazamank, to retrieve it, and he used magic to remove all the water from that side of the lake and found it on a potsherd. Then he put the lake waters back. Prince Hardadef offered to present a magician who, though 110 years old, was still alive and could put a head back on that has been cut off. The king said a prisoner should be executed to test this skill, but Dedi said, "Not on a man." So a goose, a duck, and an ox were brought, and Dedi made them walk without their heads by magic. What the king wanted was the designs of Thoth, and Dedi told him they were in a chamber at Heliopolis. But only the eldest of 3 children in the belly of Red Dedet, conceived by Re, would bring them. They are born and blessed by gods and goddesses, but the tale is incomplete, although it is apparently intended to explain how the kings of the 5th dynasty survived in Khufu's time.
ways are so unfamiliar. It's hard to see how we are one, but it's time. Arms can be for loving, for holding people. Hands can be for reaching out to touch someone. It's time.